Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. Boy, government and disease and politics are affecting everybody these days, it seems, although at least the election is over. I'm Bernie Schoenburg, journalist in Springfield, and joining me on the show today, Hannah Meisel is back. She is a reporter with NPR Illinois. Hannah, welcome back.
Glad to be here.
And Raymon Troncoso is also with us. He has been on the show before, though not with me. So good to meet you, and welcome to the program, Raymon.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks for having
me. And he is with Capital News Illinois in Springfield, which helps fill a lot of gaps that newspapers are leaving open by having smaller staffs than they used to. So on we go. Very good. Hannah, state government has been in the spotlight recently, particularly House Speaker Mike Madigan, who all but 2 years has been Speaker since 1983. And some people associated with him and with Commonwealth Edison, the company that seems to be associated with his name, were in court this week. Why don't you fill us in on where things are?
Right. So in mid-November, pre-Thanksgiving, the feds indicted this group of four, three ex-ComEd lobbyists, one who happened to be a very long time friend, confidant, served with Mike Madigan in the House in the 70s, and then the ex-CEO of Exelon, which is ComEd's parent company. And so, of course, the feds since July, since they dropped this so-called deferred prosecution agreement against ComEd, kind of outlining the scheme. We've had a few drips of more specific things about what that the bribery scheme to curry favor with Mike Madigan entailed. And so what we know from everything so far, from the deferred prosecution agreement in July to the Fidel Marquez, who is the ex vice president of ComEd, he pled guilty in September, and we saw a few other things. And right before Thanksgiving, the evening before Thanksgiving, this special investigative committee that is looking into whether Mike Madigan did anything untoward, the official line is conduct unbecoming of a legislator. All of these emails dropped that were part of the inquiry for that investigation. And so we got to see, how Mike Mclean, this longtime confidant of Mike Madigan, operated. And we've seen his emails before. We've seen how brazen he is, how just casual he is about things. But this is more of an open window than we've seen before into his world, which is he believes that he is acting at all times, at the behest of the speaker. Of course, we all know people, maybe not even in real life, but like at least characters, TV and movies, who think that they have they want as much association with someone in power as possible. So they exaggerate sometimes. So, we have Mike Mclean, and we have these other lobbyists, John Hooker and Jay Doherty and Ann Pramaggiore, who was the CEO of Exelon. They pled not guilty in court this week. It was pretty standard proceeding. But, from their attorney statements when they got indicted a couple of weeks ago, it's clear that they are going to fight this, or at least give off the appearance of fighting this if they, discovery is going to begin soon. And I think a lot of times when people are involved in a federal investigation, when it gets to that point of, having to understanding to the extent to which their personal lives are going to be turned even more upside down, right, and have things revealed to the public, they often choose to, take a plea deal.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll see if that happens. I know Mike Mclean, who is in his 70s, and he's a former legislator, who I actually waved at in a car in Springfield not long ago because I covered him when I was a young reporter in Springfield in the late 70s, early 80s. nice guy, but clearly in those emails, it showed some evidence, apparently, of what federal prosecutors have said since last summer, that associates of Mike Madigan were being given jobs and contracts from ComEd. Kind of patronage moved over there when patronage at the state was disallowed, or at least limited greatly by the Rutan decision and other past court rulings, that being a Supreme Court ruling that limited patronage severely, even when Jim Thompson was governor and forward. So Mike Mclean has said basically he's very loyal to Speaker Madigan, and we doubt that he will turn on the boss. He says that this whole case against him and the others associated with ComEd was just a way for federal prosecutors to try to turn normal political practices like getting people jobs as a way to get Speaker Madigan in a legal bind. But it is very clear that in Mike Madigan's requests to ComEd, which are rather strong in some of those emails, saying, our friend, meaning everybody who thinks Speaker Madigan really is interested in getting this person on the board, which was Juan Ochoa, who was from Chicago, used to run, I guess, Navy Pier or something in Chicago. They were pushing people to get jobs. They were pushing interns from Madigan's 13th Ward in Chicago to get internships. And we will see where this goes. But all of this has some consequences we'll talk about in a minute. But the company, Commonwealth Edison, has said, and I'll go to Raymon on this one, that they agreed that they were trying to do things to basically bribe, to influence Mike Madigan and be on his good side for legislation. There have been a couple of major legislative moves in recent years that helped the utility industry, particularly Commonwealth Edison. And Raymon, the Public Interest Research Group, PIRG, put out a report saying that the legislation that was passed, and it was passed with bipartisan support, really had some consequences for consumers. Fill us in a little bit about why this is of the public interest. And by the way, I should say Commonwealth Edison, in that deferred prosecution agreement, they're going to pay a $200 million fine, but if they cooperate with authorities for 3 years, the charges go away. Anyway, Raymond, tell us about that report and utility rates.
Yeah, so according to that report, which is it's a 111-page report from the Illinois Public Interest Research Group, and they essentially said that the investments that were mandatory under the law that was passed as part of this 2011 legislation that ComEd had to make into their utilities basically was recouped pretty much completely from consumers, and that savings that consumers should have seen over that time period just didn't materialize. But on the other hand, ComEd, over an 8-year period that they looked at from 2011 to 2019, made billions of dollars more than they would have otherwise because of the way this legislation worked. That kind of bypassed what the Illinois Commerce Commission's typical regulation for utilities are.
Right. So, and of course, when they make money, that means ratepayers are paying that money. And of course, they always frame the legislation, or have framed it, as modernizing the energy grid and how they build people and smart meters and all of that. And then I know there was follow-up legislation a couple of years ago when Governor Rauner was there. Again, bipartisan passage, and it passed amazingly quickly with the lobbying power of ComEd. But it also saved a couple of power plants in the Quad Cities and in nuclear power plants and in Clinton, and which saved hundreds of jobs, I think more than 1,000 jobs combined, which the legislators from the area, including Republicans, were for. I'm going to turn back to Hannah. These latest revelations of Mike Mclean, so close to Speaker Madigan, and the others now being indicted and pleading innocent so far, still, that has had an effect on Speaker Madigan's future, because he has continually said he wants to be Speaker again. But now we have had developments, including Kathleen Willis, a member of his own leadership team, saying they will not vote for Speaker Madigan. That brings to 19 the number of Democrats who say they won't vote for Speaker Madigan for Speaker again. That vote comes in early January. Is there any chance Mike Madigan will be Speaker, or where does this leave kind of the status of the legislature?
I've heard a lot of people say, don't count him out just yet. And I mean, I guess that's true. I mean, we've all seen the speaker in action over many years, but that also kind of assumes that Democratic politics are as they have been. And that's just not true. We've seen this massive wave of progressive power in Illinois Democratic politics in, I don't know, the last decade or so. You've seen literal Democratic Socialist of America members on the Chicago City Council, and you see, folks of that flavor of those politics, starting to enter the General Assembly in the last few years too. And, they are Democrats in name, but, we've seen the Republican Party kind of in turmoil in the last several years, maybe a decade, where they have this, far-right faction, and, centrists are kind of left holding the bag, and they don't know what to do. We really have the same kind of thing emerging on the left, which is, these progressives who don't necessarily want to be associated with establishment Democrats anymore. And Mike Madigan is the definition of an establishment Democrat. As we've often pontificated, he doesn't necessarily have a ton of closely held, Democratic values. He's really, he's a power broker. And so he is able to move to the center of what his caucus wants and, try to round up votes that way. And, we've seen that caucus move more to the left in recent years. And they just, as we saw on November 3rd, it was a lackluster election, to put it mildly, for Illinois Democrats, and Democratic proposals, including, importantly, the governor's, signature graduated income tax amendment, which went down
in flames.
I would say in flames, but yeah. Well, let's say that, yeah. And in the days after the election, the governor himself and other folks like Dick Durbin and lots of Democrats said, well, it's because Republican opponents were, and even, moderates were able to draw the lines between Democrats and Mike Madigan, and Mike Madigan is now a liability to the party.
Right. Yeah. So you had Governor Pritzker, Tammy Duckworth, U.S. Senator, Dick Durbin, U.S. Senator, saying that Madigan should step aside, at least as Democratic Party chair, because he is a liability. In Central Illinois, we had that rematch between Betsy Dirks-Landrigan, a Democrat from Springfield, trying to unseat Rodney Davis, a congressman from Taylorville, Republican. She came within a point 2 years ago. She got beat badly this time by, 10 points or so. And her opponent, Rodney Davis, linked her in ads, and the national groups chimed in saying she's Mike Madigan's pick. And after all this Commonwealth Edison stuff, despite the fact Republicans had used Mike Madigan as a weapon against Democrats for years and it hadn't stuck as much, it really stuck more. And I will say about these 19 Democrats who have now said, who are House members or going to be House members just elected there, who are going to vote for Speaker this year, if they've come out in public and said, I'm not going to vote for Mike Madigan, I cannot imagine how any of them could then turn around and vote for Mike Madigan and survive in another 2 years if they wanted to stay in politics, even if they wanted to run for dog catcher back home. Just because of what has happened to Madigan's name through this situation, even though, of course, he claims he is innocent of any wrongdoing and has not been charged. But things are getting mighty close, and you can see kind of a shift happening. And we know that in the past, in pre-Madigan days, I think when Bill Redmond was named Speaker, it took, I think, more than 90 votes in the House back in the late 70s. These things can take a long time, but as far as people flipping back to Madigan, I just see that as an unlikelihood at this point. If unlikelihood is actually a word. So we'll see where it goes. Let's get to some other situations. Obviously, the coronavirus was a story that everybody hoped would be 14 days. Raymon, the governor started having these daily briefings way back when, if it was February or March. And yet things have now surged once again, and tell us kind of where we are on the whole situation with COVID-19, because once again, people may not like what the governor's doing. Certainly business people who own restaurants and bars that are now closed to indoor seating, but we've had a resurgence and the state is trying to take it on.
Yeah, well, frankly, the forecast for the next 2 months is fairly bleak. They're, expecting record numbers of deaths, record numbers of hospitalizations. We've already seen the highest single-day death total of 238 deaths were recorded in a 24-hour period yesterday. But even though those numbers could include some late reports over the Thanksgiving weekend, because, over that span, they weren't really recording deaths, or some of those may lag, but still, well over 200 people that died in Illinois, something that Pritzker brought up, like, even if this isn't technically a 24-day recording period, this is a problem. There are less than 25% of total hospital beds left in the state. And when it's ICU beds, intensive care unit beds, it's less than 20%. And, the amount of COVID patients in those beds is only around 17%, but that's a huge chunk that's just taken out of the equation, because you need those beds for everything else, for car crashes, for heart attacks, cancer patients, just for everything else. And when COVID's clogging up the system like this, you're going to see more hospitalizations, more deaths from other causes that aren't even related to COVID. So it's understandable that the governor is trying to put in these mitigations, and it's understandable that business owners who haven't seen any stimulus relief are upset about it.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up a little bit. There's still this kind of partisan divide nationally, but also in Illinois, where particularly rural Republicans are saying, oh, the big city governor just wants to hurt our businesses. But we're hearing more of an outcry too, even from representatives in the Springfield area saying we really need input. The legislature hasn't met in months. The governor is doing this on his own. Our businesses are hurting terribly. And yet the governor says, I'm trying to follow the science and move along. So I guess, and we've seen court cases, but the governor has won most of them when businesses are saying, you should let us be open and we can let people protect themselves and we can socially distance and have people wear masks, although masks are also kind of on the outs. So we're still seeing people kind of a partisan divide and a geographical divide saying, we don't want to follow all these rules because they're hurting the economy too much. And as President Trump had said, we don't want the remedy to be better or to be worse than the disease itself. So we're going to see those partisan divides.
Yeah. In terms of the economy, they're saying that, there's this trade-off between either opening the economy or keeping people safe. Even in places where there haven't really been lockdowns or shutdowns, the economy isn't really doing that stellar. So in my home state of Florida, the governor has actually prevented municipalities from passing mask mandates and from, locking down businesses and stuff. And still the revenues for the state are still significantly down, just in general. Even without these lockdowns, people are scared to go out and spend money because this is a very deadly disease. And something that Pritzker has brought up is that there's nothing really we can do at the state level to boost our economy while this is going on. We need federal stimulus money. We need Congress to get together and give us money basically to pay people to either shut down their businesses or to stay at home, because otherwise the incentive is, while all these things are locked down, you still need to work, you still need to eat. So it's hard. It's like a vice grip on everyone right now.
Right. And we know that in Washington, as we tape this program, they are talking about another COVID relief package. Republicans have, including Illinois members of Congress, have generally been resistant to direct help to states, but they are very open to more help for businesses, similar to what was given out before. So we'll see where that goes, because in the waning days of the Trump administration, we're not exactly sure what the president will sign, but it looks like Democrats and Republicans are at least talking about working together. Hannah, on the COVID situation, there's also been an outbreak that has caused obviously heartbreak, but also consternation among people who think that the state has let it get out of hand at the LaSalle Veterans Home. Why don't you bring us up to date on where we are on that?
Right. So on November 1st, the Veterans Home in LaSalle, which is a state-run, home, a skilled nursing facility for folks who had served in the military and are, they need a place to live and be taken care of. So on November 1st, the Veterans Home reported its first cases, and by I want to say the 8th, they had reported their first deaths, and the cases among both residents and staff, and the deaths just have kept mounting during the course of November. And it almost seemed like it was going unnoticed. And, the local lawmakers, Sue Rezin, a Republican senator from Morris, she had sent a couple letters, didn't hear back. And then finally, a Senate hearing got scheduled, but there's a bunch of political things that happened, and Sue herself was not actually allowed to be on the committee. And the governor, every time we reporters have asked about it, his answers, I would say, have upset some people, especially those local lawmakers who feel as if he's being a little bit too casual about this, especially given the fact that back in 2015, we had an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease at the Quincy Veterans Home. And, that was under former Governor Bruce Rauner's watch. And, they did, in the coming out of all the information, they did actually attempt to hide some things, and the law was changed so that notification has to be given to families within 24 hours. Right. So they, the Pritzker administration's been following the law, but still, folks feel as if he's being hypocritical because then candidate J.B. Pritzker hammered Bruce Rauner on the deaths and the outbreak of Legionnaire's disease in the Quincy Veterans Home. And, so now we have 29 dead veterans in the LaSalle home, which is nearly a quarter of the residents, which is just absolutely mind-blowing. And nearly 90% of the residents have been infected. Right. And it seems to be on the downswing. I'm checking those numbers every single day. But God, it's just it's
a difficult situation. Yeah. And of course, what's interesting, not interesting, it's just a reality of the COVID situation that once it hits long-term care facilities, which the veterans homes would be, and the spread is often very rapid, and deaths, especially with a lot of people with pre-existing conditions, can happen quickly. Raymon, I'll go to you because we could discuss a little also. Prison settings are like this. Recently in the federal prison at Marion, there were more than 230 cases. And I know just from daily reporting in the counties around Springfield, with the prison in Jacksonville and the prison in Taylorville, which both of them have settings where a lot of people sleep in dormitory style big rooms, they've had outbreaks where sometimes dozens of people get infected. This is just another problem for state and federal authorities. And I know the Cook County Jail for a while had an outbreak early on in the pandemic. So I guess until the vaccine comes, this continues to be a problem in prison settings too.
Yeah, it's kind of the same deal when you're talking about these senior folks' homes, prisons, any sort of group setting where people are kind of have to be housed together or congregated. You're going to have these sorts of outbreaks, and they're usually being supervised by the state or private entity that has to adhere to strict state guidelines. So when those guidelines aren't followed, it obviously creates a huge problem. In the LaSalle home, for instance, there's 2 different audits that occurred from the Illinois Department of Veteran Affairs, I believe. And they showed that, they weren't following guidelines. There was non-alcoholic based soap being used, which has been shown to not kill the coronavirus. There are guidelines not being followed in terms of how people should be kept apart from workers who have tested positive and were still showing up to the care facility. So, things just kind of get out of hand, both in prisons and in these homes where state workers aren't following the rules.
Okay, well, we're just about out of time, and I'll just say quickly, it looks like marijuana sales in Illinois may top $1 billion this year, so that's one bright spot for the government and making some money, and hopefully people are using responsibly. With that, I'm Bernie Schoenburg. To Raymon Troncoso, to Hannah Meisel, thank you both for joining me, and we'll see you next time. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.